Everyone, this is again Francesca Lievi, and this is the second lecture of our course together. Today, I would like to talk with you about the double pyramid. This may be maybe a new concept for some of you, but we will take it step by step so that it can be clear for everyone. For those of you who have never seen it before, this is what the double pyramid looks like. So the idea is to compare the food pyramid, which is the one that you have on the left, with the environmental pyramid. We'll go back to this. So just to give you an outline of the presentation for today, we will start by looking into different nutritional models all over the world. Then I would like also to take a moment to think about your food pyramid, and then I would like to compare that with the recommended food pyramid. And then after that we will start to go through the different parts of the double pyramid. So what is the history behind it, and some information, and also some connection with the indicators that have been used, and also we will see the results of the newest edition, which is the edition of 2016. And then briefly I will also talk about some applications that double pyramid has found in other projects. So here are some examples of nutritional models around the world. As you can see, they look very different. There is not one unique nutritional model for all countries. And they are also quite in line with some cultural aspects of different countries. So, for example, in China, we have a nutritional model which is shaped like a pagoda, which is a common architectural element in China. And, or for example, some nutritional models take into account physical activity as well. This is the case, for example, of Japan, is in the second row there in the middle. So you see that is this kind of inverted pyramid, and then there is a person on the top spinning around. So they include also this element of physical activity together with nutrition. And many others have the circle or the plate in one form or the other. And or for example, Canada has this rainbow, so a bit different shape. But they all have in common the idea that they try to present to the citizens of their country information on what is recommended to eat, and also what kind of foods that are typical of the average diet for that country, in which quantities they should be eaten. So which should be eaten in largest quantities and which should be eaten more rarely, so also in smaller quantities. I'm really quite fascinated personally by this variety of nutritional models, because I think it really gives an idea of how food culture of different countries is, and what are the differences between different countries. So I think this is an interesting start to think about also, for example, what is the nutritional model in your country and how does it compare to those of other countries around the world. But let's move to this. So what is your pyramid? And maybe at this point you may stop the video, and you can, this is an exercise that I usually have with together with this lecture, because I think it gives a very first-hand kind of impression of the topics that we are discussing. So maybe you can, in this case, stop the video and take a moment to draw on a piece of paper this pyramid that you have here, so with these different layers. And then in each of these layers, you can write or draw, if you like, what are the things that on average you eat, for example, during a whole week. So on the lowest level, you should put what are the things that you eat in largest quantities. So what are the things that you eat every day or almost every day? And then as you go up, you should put those things that you eat more rarely. So especially on the top, there will be those things that maybe you don't eat even every week, or maybe just once a week. So try really to think carefully of what is the average diet for your week and how do the different foods classify on these levels, which represent how often you are eating and in which quantities they are eaten by you. So take a moment to do this exercise, and then we can go back to the rest of the information. So I don't know, what does your food pyramid look like now that you have represented on it what are what is your food consumption on average, but this is the recommended consumption for different foods according to the Mediterranean diet. So you can see on the lowest levels, so these two green levels that are those that are about what we should be eating every day. There is fruits and vegetables, and then also a lot of grains and potatoes and some legumes. And then as we go up, we have some fats, and then we have some milk and dairy products. And then when we start reaching the top, we find cheese and eggs and fish. And then at the very top, we have meat and sweets. So on the tip of our pyramid, we have those foods that are rich in saturated fats and in sugars, and also meat, and especially red meat. So maybe now you can take a moment to think about how these recommended consumption levels compare with what you have in the food pyramid that you have drawn, and just to see where you stand in a way. So let's go back to the double pyramid. So this is what it looks like, and this is just to have a first glance at it, and you can see what strikes the most is that when we take the food pyramid on the left that we have just looked at, and then we put this environmental pyramid next to it, which is like a summary of different environmental impacts of food. We will see then in detail which environmental impacts they are. What is striking really is that there is almost this exact direct correspondence of those elements that should be eaten in smaller quantities, being also those foods that have the highest impact, and then vice versa, those foods that should be eaten in larger quantities, being also those foods that have a smaller impact on the environment. So for example, we have vegetables and fruit that are on the left, they are at the base of the pyramid, and then on the right, they are on the tip of the pyramid. So it represents how small is the environmental impact of food. I think this is a good starting point to start to get familiar with this double pyramid. And this is a concept that has been developed by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, with which I've also been involved for some projects. And it's interesting because their approach is very multidisciplinary. So also when compiling, for example, the double pyramid, they have tried to harness really the expertise from different fields and different disciplines. So not just nutrition and not just environmental disciplines, so all of them combined. And then one of the aims is really to communicate complex issues regarding food in a simple way, because the idea is to be open to everyone. So to have, yes, a very strong scientific evidence, but also to be able to be understandable by everyone, so not just by academics. And two other important features of the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition are the global scope of the activities and also the involvement of youth. This is also very important. And if you want, maybe you can also check on the website how this is done. But going back to the double pyramid, which is one of the strongest projects really of the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, and one of the projects that has been there for the longest time. So we can take a look at the history of this double pyramid. It started very soon after the foundation of the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition. And you can see on this graph also that is become then the symbol of BCFN. So in this logo with the two pyramids, it reflects the double pyramid that we have just seen. And then you can take a look also at all these different events that where the double pyramid has been presented and discussed, and there have been events in different places. Some have been in Italy during the International Forum on Food and Nutrition that is taking place every year since 2009, but there have been also presentations in other countries. And also you have an overview of all the publications that have been done concerning the double pyramid with different updates. We will see later on that the amount of data that has been used to produce the double pyramid has increased very much during this time frame. So every time that there has been new studies introduced and new data taken into consideration, there has been an update and a publication. And I can suggest that maybe you can also go and download at least maybe the latest version and the latest update of the double pyramid, and you can take a better look at this sort of publications. So a quick look at what is the definition of a sustainable diet. So you have here a very comprehensive definition given by Fisher and Garnett 2 years ago. So basically the idea is to ensure the food security and nutritional security of the present generation, but also to ensure it for future generations. So this is very similar also, if you are familiar with the definition of sustainable development, this is very much in line with that. So it's important to notice how in this definition they are taking into account really both for environmental issues, so they talk about biodiversity and ecosystems, but also cultural issues, economic issues, and of course nutritional issues. So this is a very comprehensive definition of what sustainable diets are. And these two authors have also defined some actions that are listed here to foster the adoption of sustainable diet in different countries. So it's necessary that, for example, that food waste is reduced, because at the moment there is about 33%, so 1/3 of the global production of food that is wasted. So it's not just a waste of food, but also a waste of the resources connected with that food, and also it's necessary to promote this transition to a more sustainable diet, because it influences so much the way that we use our environmental resources. So these are some suggestions, and also of course the first one about taking into account for small farmers and the necessities of these small farmers and how to make the system more favorable for them. So all these actions that have been defined by these authors could go in the direction of promoting sustainable diets in different countries. So going back about the double pyramid and how these impacts are calculated. So we have seen an overview of what is the double pyramid, and we have seen an overview of the history of the double pyramid. And now, before getting into the in a way the results of these environmental impact calculations, I would like to start with defining what is life cycle analysis, because it's at the basis of how the environmental impacts are calculated in this also in this context. So the idea of life cycle analysis, especially in this context, so in the context of food, is to take into account for all the different phases of production, and then also for all the different phases of processing and packaging and distribution, and also finally of cooking. So we can see that really it's a very comprehensive look on how food is produced and also on how food is consumed. So when now little by little we will go into the different types of environmental impacts that are calculated, keep in mind that this is what we're looking at. We are looking at the whole process, and you can imagine how different resources are used in different steps of this process and of this cycle. So life cycle analysis tries to look at all these different phases and tries to calculate what are the impacts coming from different phases. So the first impact that we can calculate is the carbon footprint. You can see also the website of the of the IPCC, so of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is part of the United Nations. You can see on their website they also have further information on this. But basically the idea is to calculate the impact in carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. So these are the emissions that are associated with the production of a commodity, like in the case of food, or it could also be a service, during all the life cycle. So if you remember the previous slide, we had that circle with all the different production phases. So in the carbon footprint calculates the carbon dioxide equivalent emissions on all the cycle. And the calculation is made considering all the greenhouse gas emissions, and then by converting them to this equivalent of carbon dioxide, and the amount emitted and its impact is calculated as global warming potential. Then we have this very important other type of environmental impact, which is the water footprint. And this is an indicator of the water consumption for a product or a service during, again, all the life cycle, so during all the different production stages. So it takes into account both for example, the withdrawals of water during the production, but also those necessary to produce the raw materials. And it's measured in liters or in cubic meters. And the method is developed by the Water Footprint Network, and it takes into account different types of water: green water, blue water, and grey water. And this type of water, different types of water, refer to the water that, in a way, falls from the sky and it's present in the environment, and the water that is present in the ground, so it's groundwater, and the water that is polluted by the service or the commodity produced. So we have not just the water used, but also, for example, the water polluted. And we can imagine that this type of water, these different types of water will be different in different production stages as well. So the water footprint accounts for all of this. And then finally we have this ecological footprint, which is the measure of the biologically productive land or sea, which is required to produce the resources that mankind consumes and the waste that it is produced. The methodology is by the Global Footprint Network. You can also check out their website for more details, and also for example, if you want to calculate your personal footprint, you can also do that. And this ecological footprint is a composite indicator. It means that it's an indicator which in turn is made by other indicators that are then converted to an equivalent measure. And in this case, the equivalent to which all the indicators are converted is the so-called global actor. So in the double pyramid, all these three types of footprints have been taken into account. And what has been done is that there has been a very wide analysis of the existing literature on these three different types of footprints. So the carbon footprint, the water footprint, and the ecological footprint. And then there has been an analysis of this, all these publications, and then a summary to represent foods on the different layers of the pyramid. And I wanted to show you this graph because I think it gives you an idea of how much research has been done also on these topics in the last years. So it's very interesting to see that in the first edition, so in 2010, there was a much smaller amount of publications dealing with these issues than what was used then in the 7th edition, so in 2016, where when there were over 400 sources for data that was then analyzed. And as I was saying before, when I showed you that picture of the history of the double pyramid, every time the data has been added and analyzed, there has been also an update of the double pyramid results. And in this slide, you can also get an idea of what kind of, to which kind of footprint, so to which kind of environmental impact the different sources refer to. Carbon footprint is the type of environmental impact that has the highest number of studies available. This is because it's also the one of the three, it is the one that is been historically used by most scholars, and it's also the one that has the most established standards for its calculation. And then there is also smaller share of studies on water footprint, and then also studies on the ecological footprint. So let's move to see the results. So here are the results for the carbon footprint. This is taken from the 2016 edition. And if you remember a bit in your head what did the double pyramid picture look like, you can see that this is very, very much reflected also in the carbon footprint results. So at the bottom we have vegetables and fruit. So those are the ones that have the smallest carbon footprint. And then at the top we have beef and we have dairy products, followed by pork and fish and poultry. So anyway, meat is really at the top, is the type of food that has the strongest and the highest carbon footprint. And you will see in this slide and also in the two following ones that there is also a certain range, so these red lines, because there may be some differences in different studies on how calculations are done, and which, for example, in the line referring to vegetables, there is large variation because, of course, there is many vegetables that one can look into, and there is different production methods as well. So this is why there is also this variation. But then, if we take the average levels, we have anyway these results. And again, this is the water footprint results. Again, we have beef on the top, and again we have in the lowest part fruit and vegetables, which have the lowest environmental impact in terms also of water footprint. And so remember that when calculating the water footprint, we talk about all those three different types of water. So we have blue water, green water, grey water, and so it's also possible to further classify the water footprint in those three types. And for example, in the case of the blue water, it can be considered relevant to distinguish between groundwater and surface water use, depending on the areas, for example. And in the case of the grey water, it can be interesting to look, for example, into different sorts of pollution. So not all sorts of pollution will affect water in the same way. So it's often interesting also to open up the water footprint and look into the different types of water that are used and how they affect the environment in different ways. And also another important thing to take into account when thinking of the water footprint is that when we talk about food and when we think of food trade, there is also this virtual water trade, because food is often traveling from one country to the other, and together with it, in a way, figuratively, are traveling also the resources that have been used to produce that food. So one common example is maybe the one of avocado, which is a type of fruit that is becoming quite popular. But avocado is also very much water intensive, so it can really create water stress. It can create locally where it is grown, it can create a lot of pressure on the local environmental resources. But then this fruit is often exported to countries that are very far, and often this is not thought about in these countries, that, you know, we are eating this avocado and this fruit has used a lot of water somewhere else and has created a lot of pressure on the environmental resources that are not close to us where we are eating that fruit, but are somewhere else and maybe somewhere really far. So I think it's also interesting, well, in all the footprints, of course, but especially in water, because it can be so crucial in some areas where water is limited. It's very good to keep this in mind as well when talking about water footprint of food. And finally, here are some results of the ecological footprint. Again, no big surprises. We have beef on top, and then we have again fruit and vegetables at the bottom. So also when it comes to land, so the amount of land necessary, beef is really the type of food that requires the most land, as also other animal products. And this, it's maybe easy to understand when you think that, you know, to produce meat, you also have first to produce the ingredients for the animal feeds, and then the animals eat these feeds, and then we make meat from these animals. So there is more than one step in the production, and that's why often animal products are so high when it comes to environmental impact, because the production steps are more than for example, for fruits and vegetables. So this is also one of the things that maybe helps you to understand what it means to calculate environmental impacts for different types of food, and why different foods are in certain levels of the pyramid. Just to go back once again to the double pyramid, we have now seen all the different impacts that have been calculated. We have seen carbon footprint, we have seen water footprint, and we have seen the ecological footprint. And all of them together, when summarized, give this result for the environmental pyramid. So once again, according to what we have seen, we see that there is a very direct link between those foods that you should eat in larger quantities and those foods that have a higher impact on the environment. And those foods that have a smaller impact on the environment, and vice versa, those foods that you should eat in smaller quantities, that are also those foods that have a higher impact on the environment. So I hope this was clear to you, and also when in the beginning you draw your food pyramid and you take a moment to think about what you eat during a week, I think it's maybe interesting now to go back again to that drawing that you made and check it not only from the point of view of nutrition, like we already did in the beginning, but also to check it from the point of view of the environment, which is now the pyramid on the right. And maybe you can reason a bit about how impactful on the environment is the diet that you have. So I will leave you also with some questions for discussion. And as I was just saying, I would like you to reflect, for example, on how do you see the double pyramid in relation not only with your personal diet, but also with the typical and average diet of your country. And also, which are, do you think, the types of foods that are used and consumed most often in your country, and how do they score in terms of carbon footprint and water footprint and ecological footprint? Do you think they're doing well, or are they doing maybe not so well? And also finally, take maybe a moment to reflect on what can be your personal contribution to move towards a more sustainable diet. Thank you very much for listening to this lecture. I hope it will be interesting for you to reflect on these issues. And once again, do not hesitate to reach out to me. I will be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.